Welcome everyone to our 183rd webinar that we've done since 2020. This one is one of the ones that, if I think about questions that I get, and I get a lot of questions, uh, one of the questions I get a lot, it's certainly in the top 10, is GPS speeds versus wheel speeds. Which one should I use? Which one's better? And and I, it has one of those answers that I always hate to give, but the answer is depends, right? So I wanted eh, I wanted to create this webinar and talk about the subject a little bit, go over some examples, talk a little bit about different things around it, and be able to have a document that we can share with some folks that may want a little bit more information on this. So um, let's just kind of jump right in and see where it goes. But there, we're going to talk about, yes, GPS, and we're going to talk about wheel speeds, but we're also going to talk about air speeds or pitot tubes a little bit. One of the things I wanted to make sure that we talk about was that there is no perfect measurement. The measurements, every measurement we take is going to have error, and so then it becomes, okay, we have some error. Where do we use the right one at the right time? But even more important is, when do we use the right tool for the right task that you're trying to do? In other words, you're analyzing something, something specifically, and you should be using the right tool for that if you have it, right? So what we're going to do here, we're going to talk a little bit about the different types. We're going to technically talk about them just a little bit, and then we're going to just jump into 5 or 6 um, uh, screen captures of data, and we're just going to poke through them and take a little look at them and show this would be the right tool to use here, this would be the right tool to use there, and we'll jump through and have a good time, I hope. Make sure, again, if you're here live with us, ask questions into the question and answer box. We've got some links that we're sharing. I'm going to talk about links as we go. If you're watching this later on YouTube, all of the links that we talk about, including the presentation, can be downloaded as a PDF from the description links in the description box below. So let's talk a little bit about different speed sources. Of course, we're going to talk about GPS. We're going to talk about wheel speed sensors. I've got the AIM wheel speed sensors here that you can add onto cars that don't have them included into maybe an ECU based link that you might have. But of course, the other ECU linked ones are available for you. And I've got a pitot tube up here where we're going to talk about a little bit about air. We're not going to talk about that one a ton, but I did want to show that source and give you some kind of an interesting couple of takes on that. So let's move forward into a little bit about GPS speeds and GPS as a whole, right? There's strengths and weaknesses to this, and there's errors that are included. But want to briefly go over some of the strengths of it. The technology continues to improve. Certainly does here at AIM with our GPS sensors. They just keep getting better and better and better. The difference between now and even 5 years ago, and certainly 10 years ago when maybe we first started using them, maybe a little older than that, but it has been an amazing difference. So the technology continues to improve. Speed, when you're getting a ton of channels from your GPS sensor, speed is the one that's the most reliable typically, and the price has dropped to the point now where it's included in with every AIM system. So it's price really isn't an issue anymore, and the the sample rate that we used to get we've always had 10 hertz or 10 samples per second on our GPS sensors, and now we're at 25, and that has and there's been steps along the way that just continue to get the accuracy better and better and better. Think about errors in GPS. The errors are as the satellites are coming down through the ionosphere and from the satellite to our sensor, that it has to cross through some things, and depending on how high it is in the sky and all these different things, that error is there, but that error is fairly constant, and certainly is constant from data point to data point, and and so that error, if you apply it to a very low speed, at 10 miles per hour, that error is the same as if you're at 300 miles per hour. So the higher the speed, the less actual error you're getting into your as measured against the rate of speed is less. So it's a very powerful sensor. Anything above maybe 25 or 30 miles per hour, that error is very small relative to the speed. So keep that in mind. Very accurate higher speeds. And it's not relying on anything else. It's tire size and gearing and all of these different things. It's and some settings in the software. It's not relying on anything like that. And with AIM, it's plug and play. It's you just plug the darn thing in and it works. You don't have to turn it on. You don't have to all of the different things that you may have to do with a wheel speed sensor. Certainly an AIM one, if you're adding to the car, needs to be set up. So plug and play. Weaknesses. Relatively low power in wattage coming down from that satellite and coming towards your antenna. So that can be easily blocked, even as to the point with trees and things like that. So we have to worry a little bit about that nowadays. Though, with more and more satellites, we can almost always find the 4 minimum we need, and having 6 or 8 gets us a pretty darn good value. But we're often seeing 14 to 18 to 20 satellites up there. So that weakness has been reduced by being able to use different GPS and GLONASS and the different systems that are up there that we're now looking at. Electronic technology can have issues. It's just the way that it is, and sometimes we may even have electronic noise from other things, multiple antennas right next to each other, carbon fiber roofs. Some of this technology can just have issues sometimes with its environment, so keep that in mind. The antenna must have a clear view of the sky, and the picture, the image that's right down there below, the non-line of sight and multipath is just one of the things I wanted to mention just real briefly, that can be a problem with GPS. If the signal comes in and bounces into the antenna, think about, since we're measuring the time it took to leave the satellite and get to the antenna, if it bounces, it thinks it's a longer distance, right? And so you can see the picture here of non-line of sight. So it's not actually hitting the antenna directly, but bouncing off of a glass window or a aluminum grandstand, or chain link fences from my surveying days were things we had to really worry about. And it bounces to the antenna. We think that's a longer, for that one of the 5 or 6 that we're getting, that one is longer, and it may move the car over 10 or 12 feet, right? So that the non-line of sight or the multipath, where it actually hits directly and also comes and bounces in, that's technology that can be a problem, especially when you're a street circuit or I know Austin, Texas has that problem with at CODA a little bit occasionally. So with the way the grandstand is. So keep that in mind. If you see something, our hardware and our software is getting better about filtering some of that out, and certainly with more and more satellites, we can get rid of some of the bad stuff automatically and go away from that. But that's the strengths and the weaknesses for GPS. Wheel speeds, strength and weaknesses there as well. Strengths, it's available on almost all of your ECU connections. Certainly the production-based car ones. Not the racing ECUs, where it's just an engine-focused piece, may or may not have it. But all of your car ECU connections have it, often all 4 wheels. And we're going to talk a lot about that and look at some examples of why that's helpful. And if that's not there, you have the option of installing an AIM wheel speed sensor or 2. So that's going to be there as well. Weaknesses. Several sources of error: the tire size, the number of magnets, the magnet flying off. There's some of those things like that. The biggest one is the tire size. We're gonna have several slides on that here in a little bit, and show how that error of either the tire swelling up at high speeds, or the loading of the tire and collapsing the tire into banking. Since it's measuring the circumference, at a very low level of basic understanding, there's a number of pickup points around there. You have to tell it the size of the tire, and it does the math, right? And the number of times it gets a signal, it does the math, and it gives you a miles per hour, a speed. Might be kilometers per hour for some. There's some weaknesses, the tire size that I just mentioned, and tire spin, tire lockup, and then that can mess up a little bit what your values are. But that really is also a strength, and that's and that's the value of what we're going to look at in a little bit. Being able to recognize that and understand when that's happening because of these four-wheel speeds, that's very, very powerful. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. If you have an aim sensor and you're going to add it to your aim device, I thought it'd be great to show a quick slide here of that setup. And you simply have to click on one of the speeds and you rename it to what that speed is. A couple important things here that I want to make sure that that we talk about is the function and the position. Make sure that on any sensor that you're adding to your analog sensors or your digital sensors, make sure that you take care of this channel function. More and more of the software, we are using channel functions to help in analysis. So make sure that you have the function correct, and if it has a position, like a wheel speed does, you can plug in that's the front right one. Speed sensor. This is the only time in my presentation here we're going to talk about sampling frequency, so I wanted to take just a second. There's I have kind of settled on 50 hertz, 50 samples per second of wheel speed is probably a good place to be. Some people would say 20, some people would say 100. So, but I've kind of settled on 50 as a pretty good overall number. So you try it out a couple. If you're going to add a speed sensor, you can change this very, very quickly and easily and see how that works for you. But I suggest 50. Unit of measure, decimal place, and the one that gets people a little bit is this one down here, because it's something we don't normally do on most of our sensors, is you have to actually measure the circumference of the tire, and you have to tell it how many pulses or magnets, or if pulses that are going through that sensor, depending on if it's a magnetic sensor or if it's a metallic sensor. And in this case, I'm telling it we have 4 pulses, 4 magnets that are put onto the piece that's spinning, and then the size of the tire. A couple different ways of measuring that tire. One of those little thin tapes, make sure the tire is at maybe your normal pressure. That's one way of doing it. That tire size is going to change, though. We're going to talk about that. The other one that I found that I had when I didn't have a tape a couple times and I needed to get that number, I put just a little drop of oil on the tire. I mean, a small little tiny dot. Some people will use chalk, and then I rolled past it. I rolled the car forward, and it left a dot, and then another rotation, it left another dot on the floor. And then I was just able to simply measure across those 2 dots, or the little chalk marks that were left. Another a quick way of getting a number that may work for you. Okay. And Matt has written into the chat box there, talks about John Block. He's the one that I always think of and wanting to bump up the sampling rate. He wanted a little bit higher on a webinar that he did with us, talking about how quickly an Indy car, or a car that's doing almost 200 miles an hour, how far it goes in 1/50th or the rotation of that tire, right? So some people might want a little bit higher of a sampling frequency. So plug in all this information, hit the save button, and of course always transmit it up to your logger, and you've got your wheel speed sensor set up. Pitot tubes is the third one that we're going to talk about briefly and show a slide and talk about and this is just measuring the airspeed coming at the car. The strengths of that is it can give you data you can't get any other way. We're always wondering why that top speed was higher on this one. Was it part of a draft? Was there a headwind on the 2 different directions of the track? It's going to answer some of these questions for you that you can't get any other way. You can see the airflow, right? You're going to get that information. The price is much reduced over the last few years. The one that Matt, our fellow that's doing the links here today, many time co-host here today, has those on his website at trailbreak.com. There'll be a link that's available here in the chat box, and it'll be in the description down below. I think in the $300 range, if I remember. Matt can maybe throw that in there and talk about it a little bit. But 300 or just above that. But you can add a pitot tube to your gauge. You can see here in the screen, with my cursor, I'm putting around it there. That's the pitot tube on Matt's car. And right when it gets behind that car, we'll have a slide with a little bit more direct information on that, and just a little bit later. The weaknesses of a pitot tube, the install will be unique to your vehicle. You're going to have to find a spot for it. It needs clean airflow. You're going to have to fabricate a mount. You're going to have to build that thing in that way. So the learning curve of analyzing the data, the data is typically fairly noisy. You can see it's this red line down here, and that's the way that the air is coming across there. So, and deeper analysis may require some aero knowledge the deeper you go. But if you're looking at just a simple, did I get a sniff of the draft at that point or not? And how far am I away before I start to feel that? If you can't feel it in the car, you should be able to see it in the data. You'll be able to get that fairly quickly. So we'll look into that a little bit more in a moment. $299 is what Matt sells these for, ready to go. So keep that in mind. I find them intriguing. I've been enjoying looking at the data and learning things just from watching that. Between the pitot tube and the onboard video, and understanding, be able to see where that car is versus where these numbers are changing is pretty interesting. I wanted to talk a little bit. I'm not going to read all of this. I'm going to leave this for you to take a look at, or get the books yourselves. But I've got a couple of clips from books here. The first one from Jorge Segers' book. He was a guest with us, and maybe Matt can link that video, that webinar video. Jorge's book is available on Amazon. Matt's put the link in there. He talks about GPS and its advantages, and the one thing that struck me the most is, we're talking speed here, but the speed is a clear advantage of being able to have that value, but really there was a couple of other things. That the quality of track maps certainly are better. We're not just relying on lateral G's and rollout distances, and so the track maps become much better. And then the other thing is with that speed accuracy, we can calculate the lap distance better, and that improves our lap segment calculations and our lap overlays. All of that is kind of built into that GPS speed sensor. That's on page 14, where this quote comes from of the book. And on page 61, it talks about what I mentioned a moment ago. It does not only increase the track maps, but speed measurements are also not influenced by wheel spin, lockup, changing of the tire radius due to load or wear. So that distance function becomes more accurate. There's value there. So if you have a moment and you haven't got that book, I strongly suggest you consider going and buying that. It's still available and ready to be purchased on the Amazon link that we showed there. So take a look at that. Most people will tell you, folks that are in the data world, this will be in their top 2 or 3 books that most will even say number 1. Books that are valuable to them as race car data acquisition manuals of how to understand the task. So keep that in mind. The other one that I wanted to talk about was from our friend Chris Brown, who wrote the book Making Sense of Squiggly Lines. Chris also has been on a webinar here with us and talked about his book and talked about his history in the sport. I include his here, a couple of slides from Chris, which was he's talking about the wheel speed errors a little bit. And I thought, okay, well, this would be a great screen capture of page 26 out of his book. Talks about the vertical load and what it does to the tire and the amount of weight that is happening there, and when you're braking, how much it squishes the tire, and of course accelerating. All of those forces are changing the height of that tire, which is creating some wheel speed errors. So again, it may sound so far that I'm down on wheel speeds, but I think your opinion of what you think I am saying will probably change fairly quickly as we get into the rest of the slides. The other one I thought was really interesting of his finding some sources of error in wheel speed measuring is he used an example of two front wheel speed sensors, so they're not driven, they're just along for the ride. But he found a very tight corner, happens to be Long Beach, very tight turn 11 at Long Beach, getting onto the front straightaway. And the different radius, because it's such a tight corner, and the different radius that each front tire goes around the corner, one was at a 211 foot radius and one was at a 231 foot radius. And because of that different radius that the tires were taking, look at the two front speed traces that you can see by the blue one is lower at this point on a right hand corner. Blue one's lower, but on a left hand corner, the blue one was higher, by 2 or 3 miles per hour. So interesting how that on very, very tight corners, that just shows that the errors that can happen in wheel speeds, they're not errors, they are true. That is exactly what that tire is doing, but you need to understand that in order to use that data correctly. Kind of interesting. With that, I think let's take one of the questions there as far as the Pitot tubes. Bruce mentions a question, curious, does barometric pressure affect the Pitot tube? And I normally would not know that answer at all, but Emiliano put out chat, as far as barometric pressures influences air density, and it influences the Pitot tube calculated speed. But you've got your outside barometric pressure and your inside barometric pressure, right? And you're just comparing the two. So my guess is the speed difference through the Pitot tube will be still fairly accurate, but we will see as we learn a little bit more. And as we get to that slide, we'll dig in a little bit deeper and see what Matt has to say about it as well. Let's talk about some actual slides here and look at some different applications of wheel speeds versus GPS, and what the strengths and weaknesses of both, and where you should use them. I'm a huge fan of GPS speed. It is in my opinion, it is my go-to, and it is what I always have at the top of my graph. It'll almost always be green. It will be there as it's kind of my rock in my data analysis. And then I also then apply other speeds depending on what I need. So keep in mind that if you, as we look at this, what are some of the values that are important? And I will use wheel speeds just as much as GPS speeds in certain instances. This happens to be a road race motorcycle. Road race motorcycles have different needs. They certainly have tire spin. They have tire lockup that we can see with front and rear speeds, but they also have, as Chloe, who is here today, and watching here, and she's in the chat box. Chloe is our resident AIM motorcycle expert, goes to a lot of tracks and handles just a ton of support for us. Very thankful for that. What she has explained in a couple of webinars in the past is the tire of a motorcycle. When you lay it over and you're in a corner, the radius is smaller, and as you bring the bike up exiting a corner, the radius, the tire circumference changes on the tire. You can see that here. What I've got in the top, I've got my GPS speed in green, and I've got the rear wheel speed on this motorcycle in blue. And the bike is coming off of a corner. We've got several corners here, and we're getting on the front straightaway here at the ridge in Washington State. And I look over here, and I to see, and this Aaron, by the way, this is some of your data, although I've stripped your name out of it. But Aaron has always been very, very nice and has shared that I could do some screen captures occasionally. But so Aaron, thank you very much. You can see what what the wheel speed trace is doing compared to the bike speed or the GPS based speed. You can see that as he's coming out of the corner and he's got to have the bike leaned over here in this right hand corner right down here in the bottom, and as he's bringing the bike up, you can see that the speed trace changes. You can see that the RPM changes with it, but the bike speed is just climbing as normal. I want to know both of those. Sometimes I need to know both of those. So use that at the appropriate time, understand it, and use the one that's best for you. I'm in no way saying that you should have only GPS speed. You should have front and rear on this bike, front, rear, and GPS, and know when to use them. The other side of that is over here on the braking. Look at when he hits the brakes. He's certainly hard on the front brake, but he's also on the rear brake, and you can see this thing has a couple of shots down where the bike is just starting to lock up, and we can pick that up as well. That's all valuable data. So just kind of an interesting thing to look at. We can see I included down here across the bottom his throttle position in black and his brake pressure in red, and you can begin to see how hard he is braking into the corner. Yeah, I did use front brake pressure and rear wheel, but you get an idea. So use both. Very, very powerful tool, and you can see a lot of what is going on. I'd love to use both. So the next one I wanted to use was a different road race motorcycle one that I thought was kind of interesting, and this was leaving a standing start on right here on the front straightaway, and taking off down the front straightaway, and I scaled everything from 0 to 140 miles per hour. So we're seeing the actual start of a standing start. And you can see as the bike takes off, again, I've got my green GPS speed. And in this case, I've got both front and rear wheel speeds from the bike. And pardon me. And I put the cursor right here, and you can see that the bike, the wheel speeds and the GPS speeds are virtually the same at 28 or about 30 miles per hour, and the bike is straight, so the bike is upright, so we don't have the changing circumference issue that we'll have in the corners, and and they're pretty much merged the same at that point. But as the speed comes up, you can begin to see some changing, right? And the other thing that I found interesting here was not only that, but look at the red one. What do you think happened there, right? The red one is having all these dropouts, and what it is, the front is the front wheel, and as the rider is doing this power on, standing starts, the front wheel's coming up off the ground, and every time that it comes off the ground, the speed of the front wheel is staying the same, or if not slowing down just a tick, and then it probably touches the ground again and shoots up and is at the same speed, and has a couple, and then a big one right here where it was off the ground for quite some time and then finally set back down on the track. It was basically skimming the track all the way down till he lifted here, leading into turn one. So things you might want to know and understand. And here's where it pulled the front wheel off the ground again, coming over here. And as Matt said in there, I did notice the same thing, and I included it into the graph, into my image here, because I thought it was pretty interesting how powerful of a bike that all of this is happening on the start of the race, and he's never for the first two corners has never gotten above 50% throttle, right? 40% for the most part, right? Right there is 44% when it's wheeling pretty good. Just a little bit higher there. Finally got up to about 90, about 100% over here in one spot. Finally, quite a ways down the track, 15 seconds into the run. So kind of a very, very powerful machines, right? So an interesting thing to see is what the two wheel speeds are doing. I love to have the GPS in there. Helps me out on the actual overall speed of the bike, but knowing what's going on with the two wheel speeds it can be very valuable depending on what you're trying to analyze. So keep that in mind. This one's an interesting one. This one is a dirt cart, and this particular dirt cart happens to be the glancing over here at the attendees, and this is the fellow this data is not here with us today, but it happens to be a shifter cart, multi-speed cart, very powerful, 125 cc motor on a dirt cart. So there's a lot of power here, and can be a lot of wheel spin. So what he's got is he's got a GPS sensor on his cart, and he's also got a rear axle speed. And so what he wanted to do, what he really wanted to know when he shared the data with me, and we were walking through some of this, we 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 wanted to see what kind of wheel spin there was, and he wanted a kind of some analysis processes that I might do to help him understand that amount of wheel spin and track conditions. And if there's something that dirt guys have learned fairly quickly is you don't want zero wheel spin, and you don't want 50%. There's a number in there that for the type of tire that you have and the amount of moisture on the track and the spot on the track in the corner that you want wheel spin, and that gives you the best acceleration rates. And so you're measuring that, and you want to start to understand that. So he's got a rear axle speed. You'll notice here that I've got two rear axle speeds, and so I wanted to give you an idea. One of the things I do, and you're going to see it a couple times here in the rest of the presentation today, is the red one is the actual raw data from the axle speed, and you can see some noise here. It's truly what is happening. The tire is rolling over there. It's in the dirt. The chain, the way the chain works on some of these types of motors, we will actually see this very often. But that isn't extremely helpful. It's nice to know that is happening, but it's not as helpful when you're trying to compare speeds of a GPS versus your axle speed. So axle speed 2 is one of the things that I do a lot nowadays, and you're going to see it as I mentioned, you're going to see it a couple of times, is I love a good rolling average filter. And this happens to be, I took that axle speed and the rolling average at a level of 5, so 5 data points before, 5 data points after, and we average those out, a rolling average, and that's what we're actually going to see here in the blue line. And so that is the wheel speed, maybe with a fairly light rolling average filter on it. But what I can do then is I built a third math channel called speed difference. And that speed difference is nothing more than what the GPS speed is minus the axle speed 2. So the filtered value, if I use the other one, the speed difference would be quite noisy as well. But you can see here now that he has an 11.7 mile per hour rear tire spin versus the actual speed of the cart, right here at this spot on the track, right? And I went ahead and I added the throttle position in just so you could see it. And he's rolling through the corner with just maintenance throttle to keep the cart sitting there doing what it's doing. And then as he's adding up the throttle, and right when he gets to full throttle, he gets the maximum amount of tire spin because he's heavily loaded laterally as well at this point of the track. So that's when he gets the most spin. And then he's only on the throttle, very small, full throttle, a very small amount of time for this lap. So the kind of interesting, just a couple of tips for you. The GPS speed is very valuable for getting the distance on the track and doing segments. You can see here we've broken it up into 4 different segments. And the acceleration zones and the 2 corners on each end, and then and the GPS is helpful to us to get that track to be very consistent, but we really want to know that tire spin as well. So very, very valuable in a dirt cart oval setting. The next one is tire spin. This is the one that I really started to use wheel speeds as much as anything, and where I become very strong and very reliant on wheel speeds. Is this one happens to be a road race car, and anybody pick out what that track map is? See if I see that into the chat box. The driver comes down into the corner, and the GPS speed here is very nice and smooth because 110, 120 miles per hour into the corner, the braking zone, and rolls on in through around the corner. But what's interesting is if we're looking at the front up here in the first part, Matt is right, and Bjorn said it's too easy. That is true, probably true, right, Bjorn? The It is Watkins Glen, and the turn one at Watkins Glen. So, but I put up all four wheel speeds here just so you can see what the difference between them and what you might want to 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 take from those. So here on the front, the driver is lifting off of the throttle and hitting the brakes, and the you can see on the front tires that the immediate shoots down. Both front wheel speeds, both rear wheel speeds shoot down, and then you start to see some noise and some separation, and that's what I want to kind of go and look at a little bit here. As the driver's coming in there, you can see that all of a sudden the blue one begins to drop below the red one. We're talking about the front right is the blue one in this upper graph here, and it starts to separate right there. And if I were to throw up the lateral G's into here, that would be right when the driver starts to turn in, and that right front tire becomes even lighter as the driver is turning into the corner. And this car happens to have ABS, and you'll start to see a little bit of noise here, and it drops below the other one because it is lighter and the ABS is kicking in and keeping it from locking up totally. But that is this lower mile per hour here is because the driver is turning in with that tire being very light. On the rear two tires, kind of interesting, is as soon as they hit the brakes, of course, the weight transfers up. The rear tires become, quite light, and you can see both rear tires are being affected by lockup while straight line braking, but ABS is helping and kicking in, and then starts to turn in, probably is releasing the brake a little bit, and things kind of settle down there. But you can see that the right rear tire, the blue one, right rear, is a little bit below the red one. Again, being the lighter tire going in, turning a smaller radius, all of that stuff is happening there, and you can kind of see that separation as well. The point that I am looking for in this math channel that's just below here is kind of interesting. What I begin to use two rear wheel speeds for very early on is to understand what the differential, the limited slip differential, is doing in the rear end. I really wanted to know how good is it working, when is it working, when does it allow some tire spin, when does it not. And having the two rear wheel speeds coming off of the corner, you can see here, I put the cursor right here where the right rear tire all of a sudden just has a short spike, right? Boom, boom. And you can see by my rear tire differential speed, the math channel here, that I don't like to do math in my head real quick when doing data analysis, but 96.7 miles per hour, 78.5, or actually it's the difference between the right rear and the left rear in this case. The difference between those two is 18 miles per hour. And that happened right there, and that's right where you go over the curb, and there's a bit of a bump there, and so you're laterally pretty heavily loaded turning to the right, and you've jumped that curb, and probably the right rear tire comes off the ground while the driver is flat to the floor on the throttle, and you have this big old drop off right there. So I wanted to see how quick that is. I wanted to understand how well the rear differential is doing its job, the limited slip, and it appears to be doing a pretty darn good job. It was in the air, so of course it slipped a little bit, but with the driver at full throttle, the thing did its job, and it pulled that back down to being very, very close together very quickly. A very, very powerful tool of wheel speeds. You would not get that in GPS, even though that's a core product of what I want to look at in my data for understanding and comparing two laps or two different cars. Maybe the GPS, but the wheel speeds add this huge value to me to understand other things about the car. So keep that in mind. The next one, I've seen a quote over here a little bit about in the chat talking about drag racing, and I happen to have it certainly is not a top fuel car, but the image I have is of a very high speed, very large rear tire of a drag slick during the launch. The amount of change of the tire at the launch, and then as the car goes farther down the track and the tire begins to grow in height to numbers that are totally hard to understand for those of us that are maybe involved in road racing or something. Those tires really, really grow as the speeds come up. The data here happens to be a family a drag car that I have some data from. This car does about a 9.5 second quarter mile, and and here are the 3 speed traces that we have on the car. And it's kind of interesting. We do have a drag slick on the car, and not nearly that size, but it is a drag slick that does grow and does wrinkle a little bit at the bottom end. But here's the 3 speed traces. Kind of interesting how another weakness of wheel speeds when you are doing standing starts, and just as long as we all understand it and understand what's happening, the value of that is pretty high. Look at what the GPS speed. The blue line is the start line. Across the bottom here is the longitudinal G, so you can see when the car, when he launches the car, you can see the longitudinal G placing it into him back into the seat, and the GPS speed starts to grow, but no wheel speed activity for a little bit, right? And we're talking small little amounts here of time, but we can certainly see it, and the reason for that is at a standing start, you must have the aim logger must have a number of hits off the speed sensor before it can do the math and start to show you the wheel speed. This particular drag truck here, it's a Volkswagen pickup, old school rabbit looking pickup with a VR6 turbocharged VR6 mid-engine in the back to a 2-speed power glide. You can see here that the speeds pick up all of a sudden. I've got the cursor right there, but at about 30 miles, front speeds are 23, the rear speed 25 is what it's recording right here. So at about 30 miles per hour, 35 miles per hour or so, where the cursor's at about 20 miles an hour, it finally starts to show you the data, and it had to rotate around and get enough data points. The front wheel speed sensor on this truck has 4 magnets glued onto a hub that is spinning in front of an AIM magnetic speed sensor. And we're getting, so it starts to pick up. The rear has 5. It is the magnetic, the metal type sensor that is picking up off of the back of the wheel studs, in this case 5 studs in this particular car, and so we're picking up the wheel speed off the back off of 5 data points. So there's a little bit of a difference of when it picks up, and the car does pull the front wheels a little bit as it goes sometimes. In this case, I don't think it did, but and then you can see by the speed trace, now all of a sudden it picks it up. So a bit of a weakness of not having this initial part. But then as it's going along, we can start to see some separations. Right here is the shift, and we can see it's again a 2-speed power glide. You can see the the tire slip here, 8% between the front and the rear of the rear tires slip, and then that comes down as it's going through first gear, and then there's the second gear shift. So you got some slip right when it does it. It's just a little bit of a hit. And then the interesting thing to show the weakness of the wheel speed sensors and where GPS may be starting to take over, if right about in this area right here, you can notice that there's the 0 point of just subtracting the front versus the rear, and the rear has a different amount of tire swell. Tire circumference is getting greater than the front tire, which is a fairly small, fairly narrow front tire. At about here, it's at 0, right? And boy, towards the end of the run, it is in negative territory of miles per hour, because now all of a sudden the front speed is above the rear as it gets here to the finish line. It ended about 140 miles per hour, 138 or whatever it was in this particular case. On this particular run, it's been around 140, and so it's kind of interesting to see how those cross over, and it's all about the tires, changing in size as it's running down the track. GPS being probably the best true value at the lights versus the wheel speeds, but the wheel speeds give us some really added value of understanding this amount of slip of the rear tires. And I've actually worked that backwards, and I can run that through all the RPM with some math channels. We're able to actually work that backwards and have the torque converter slip, and I'm actually able to measure that as well, and that's helped us a lot on understanding the torque converters and changing that for the optimum launches. So having those wheel speed sensors are very valuable to us. NHRA, this is just a bracket car. We don't race it professionally or anything, but they sometimes don't like wheel speed sensors. But we've flown under the radar so far with our data loggers in our cars. So kind of interesting stuff. The again, wheel speed sensors. While you see the errors that we've talked about here, there is huge value in it. So people ask me which sensor do you like, GPS or wheel speed? It depends, right? And it depends on the task that we're actually looking for. And the last example that I want to chat about briefly is the one we briefly touched on earlier, and that is that airspeed. And I thought it's something I don't have a ton of experience with, but Matt has shared this data with the entire group in the past, and so I use it here, and he catches up with this car. And I pause it here. I've actually got the live data. If we have a minute here, we might jump in and take a look at it. But you can see the green is the GPS speed, and I did the same exact thing here. The pitot tube is this red trace that's in here, and very jaggedy. Remember, I talked about pitot tubes. One of their weaknesses, just one of the things that it has is fairly noisy data. And I again then applied a filter, a rolling average filter, and I've bolded it here just by clicking on the channel tag. So the blue one is the filtered information, and you can see what the value is versus the speed. And so here, back up just a little bit earlier than where I've actually taken the snapshot of the image, the pitot tube and the GPS was right on top of each other. There was no headwind, there was no tailwind, probably down inside of the trees here in the little valley here at I think it was Palmer, right, Matt? I think maybe, if I remember right. And so the data is fairly close, and then all of a sudden you see that the pitot tube, Club Motorsport, thank you very much. You can see that all of a sudden the airspeed takes a drop, right, compared to the actual vehicle speed. And that's right when Matt pulls in behind this car. I will bring that up in just a moment, and we'll look at it so we can scroll back and forth and show you how, from the video and from the pitot tube, you can see when this thing starts to pick up the airspeed. It drops down to I put the cursor right here, 20.6 mile per hour less airspeed than there was just 500 feet earlier on the track when before he got right behind the car. And you can the draft and that effect at and we're only doing 80 73 miles per hour at this point right here. That's a big difference, right? And it would be even cooler on a higher speed track to see that come up behind somebody and see it. This just happened to be the largest example, so I used it. But there's throttle position down here. There's the as soon as the guy is giving him a wave by, obviously it's an open track day, and the guy has stuck his hand out and said, "Pass me here." So Matt's throttled up and passed him before the next corner. But that airspeed there is pretty interesting. So let me bring that up real quickly just so we can see it. Here's that exact same data, and I think if I go back here we can see that Matt is at about 73 miles per hour. The airspeed is very, very similar, and as we scroll ahead, watch the video and watch the data here on the right side. It's just kind of interesting to watch as he comes up behind the car. He's starting to sweep behind him. We're just about to see it, so I'm just going to go slowly across, and as Matt gets right behind him, you can start right about here. He's starting to get a sniff of the effect of that car being in front of this antenna right here, not antenna, the pitot tube, and starting to understand the air coming off that car is starting to create the draft effect. And you can see when it really picks up is when he pulls over and there's the guy telling him to go around to the other side, and pretty full, but then as he pulls up right behind him, but it takes another large dive and then all of a sudden shoots out, because if we take a look at that, Matt pops out to the other side real quickly, and it starts to the headwind comes back at him. So it's the kind of an interesting thing to see here, of as I drag the cursor across here to see that air what I called headwind. It's just a math channel of the GPS speed minus the Pitot Tube speed, and we're getting this difference. And all I'm doing is a math here. I again don't like to do math in my head if I can get away with it when I'm doing analysis. So I build math channels to help me through some of this. But so if we're watching this real quickly, boom, there's the math. The peak is right there, right when he's directly behind the car, and it immediately starts to come off as he's pointing this way, and the driver's of the Porsche is pointing that direction. Now the Pitot Tube is getting less of the weight coming off of the Porsche real quickly, and then boom, by the time he gets up to up in this area, it's fully gone about at this point. So very, very interesting. And I think Matt has shared this data with everybody. If you really want to jump in and take a look at it, I find it intriguing. So, and I think you might as well. So take a look at that. Let's jump back in to the PowerPoint. I thank Matt for sharing some of that. It's pretty very, very interesting stuff, and very valuable. Let's talk a little bit as we kind of close down this webinar. Hopefully you found some of that interesting and understanding, and helping you understand the GPS versus wheel speeds with a little bit of airspeed thrown in there from the Pitot Tube as well. All of these videos, this one included, will be up on our YouTube site. The webinars are there. Brick has also been building smaller, shorter, very focused, specific videos that are all on our YouTube site as well. Make sure when you go there that you click on the subscribe, and you can click on the little bell icon there. Since we're putting more and more of these up there, you may want to know when they pop up, so you can begin to get an idea of what's available for you to view. I'm also working on a bunch of shorter ones as well, and hopefully with some of the other things I've been doing, slowing down now a little bit, I'll be able to get some of those finished and begin to start adding shorter, very specific, 2 or 3 minute videos about functions inside of the Race Studio software. So all of those videos are there. Visit our YouTube site and check that out. Customer support, our fellas have been out there working hard. That's what we do. We're an electronics company that happens to provide fantastic customer support out at the tracks, on the phone, via email, websites, our YouTube page. It's what we do. If you have any questions, make sure that you give us a contact, either at the track, on the phone, via email. Look forward to hearing from you. We want to make sure that you get the most bang out of your data acquisition investment. So give us a holler. Make sure you allow us to help you. We happen to have the SCCA runoffs are coming up here soon, September 28th. In just 4 days from now, we're going to have AIM techs at the SCCA runoffs. Through Friday, October 4th. There is a special number for those of if you know of anybody that's going to be the runoffs, or you're going to be there. There's a special number, 804-566-3282. That if you dial that number, you will get directly to our 2 AIM techs that'll be right there on site. And that's the best way to get a hold of them. That's going to be Sabian and Corey will be there for that, for those days. This document on the right, if you're going to be there, the SCCA is using an alternative start-finish line, and what that entails is possibly if you want to run your start finish line in your AIM devices at the same spot that they are providing lap times from. I've put together a document. There's a link down here that you can click on if you get the PowerPoint from this presentation. Matt is also included it into the chat, and it'll be in the if you're watching this later on YouTube, it'll be in the description. That document has some very, very good directions on how to load track maps and change track maps to different track maps that are available to you in Race Studio 3. So even if you're not going to be at the runoffs, I would download this document and read through that. It's fairly short, very, very specific. It has hyperlinks right here on the table of contents, so if you only want to look at certain things. And it also looks at Race Studio 3 current processes, but also has a section on Race Studio 2 for some of the folks that are still using our previous software. So take a look at that document. I think there's a ton of value inside of that document, even if you're not at the runoffs, but certainly for those that are there, it is valuable. The next webinar that we're going to do, October 8th, Tuesday, October 8th. It's early in the month, so it's our later time of the day. So that'll be 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. We're going to have another one, a webinar that's similar to this. We're doing 3 here in a row that are similar. This one's going to be on accelerometer data. And while today we talked about wheel speeds versus GPS speeds, we talked a little bit about with a few examples. We're going to dig in a little bit more and do a little bit deeper analysis on accelerometer data. What's the difference between the sensor-based accelerometers and the GPS-based, and then give you a few examples of ways you might want to use the accelerometer data in maybe different ways than what you are already. So accelerometer data, when, why, how, will be our next webinar, October 8th. Join us here. It'll be a great time. The one after that, by the way, is going to be temperatures and pressure sensors. And we're going to talk about how to set those up in the software, make sure that everybody has a good understanding of that, and then maybe some ways of using that in analysis that might be slightly different. So looking forward to the next couple of webinars. The contact information for me, if you have any questions on what we talked about today, is there at the bottom of your screen, roger@aimsports.com. Give me a holler. Always happy to chat about stuff like this. If you have any questions on this or have any comments on some of the stuff that we talked about today, I look forward to hearing it. So thanks everybody for all of your time being here. Thanks for all of you that come along and have been joining us for these webinars. We've created quite a community here, and it's very, very enjoyable. And that's the reason that we keep doing it, providing all the information plus having a great time with all of you folks. So thanks everybody for coming. Thanks, Matt, for doing the links in the chat box. Thanks to all of our AIM techs that are out there helping everybody all the time. It's a tough job, and they do such a great job at it. So thanks everybody. Look forward to seeing you guys at the next one, and we'll talk to you guys soon.